mind passing me the microphone just to give
I don't need a chair, I'd rather. Would you? Okay. Okay. There's one here. Oh. Is this live?
Right. Hello everybody, sorry for the delay. We're going to start. Just a very quick welcome to everybody. We're going to try to keep it as informal as possible. I want to thank the speakers for coming here. Thank you for coming, and we're also running a bar at the end, so feel free to just grab a beer and be part of the conversation. I'm very excited about the session today. We have Katrina Stewart from Bartlett. We have Matt Johnston afterwards from RCA. Tom Betts, is a video game developer, and also Slap, a trio that will be performing afterwards. We're going to have a little bit of the live coding session at the end, a short roundtable with questions and conversation, and after that we're going to keep the live coding performance going. So feel free to just be part of the conversation and enjoy it.
Hi everyone, my name is Katrina Stewart, and this is Luke Whitaker. Today we're going to be talking to you about a project that we've been working on, and it's an adventure puzzle computer game called Lumina City. A bit about sort of my background and Luke's background. I studied at the Bartlett. I did both my degree and my part 2 at the Bartlett, while Luke set up a computer game company called State of Play Games. I think that probably our approach is probably quite to the other talks that you've had so far. Predominantly because the game that we made is almost completely handmade. So it's made out of card, paper, and then we filmed. We made a full-scale sort of 3D model, physical model, that we then filmed and then animated a 2D character to go through it. So I think what we're going to do is sort of just start off with a little bit of our backgrounds and how we sort of came to working together. I grew up in a small village in Italy, and I come from my family are made up of, they're all toy makers. So I was always, from the beginning, I was always very interested in sort of play. And the idea of sort of interacting with various things. These are just a sort of quite quickly going through just a few of the projects that I worked on while I was at the Bartlett. This was in my degree where I designed a stunt school for Los Angeles. And the idea was really that this building was almost like a sort of a building that would teach you to be a stuntman. So it was almost like an obstacle course, and you know the architecture would be interactive and demand a sort of response. This was my project that I did in my final year, and this is the London City Farmhouse. I've always sort of been interested in the social, cultural and architectural implications of sort of existing and new technologies. And the idea for this design was that it would become a sort of prototype for a community to be built in London. And all of these things, it was set up of a number of different spaces, and all of them would use sort of renewable energies to power it. So this was our community kitchen, using a solar oven, and then all the street lamps within the building would be using lemons, or would be powered using lemons. This is just sort of more examples of using methane, for example, for the cooking element, and then electric eels. These are some of the models that I made in the project. And I suppose that this is where I then used these sort of techniques when we then came together to making the game. And these were the sort of final drawings. And Luke, if you want to talk a bit about it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so whilst Katrina was working on those projects during their final year, this is what I was doing. We hadn't met yet. I was making games that were, they're all handmade. This one is designed to look like it's made out of paper and cardboard. It is made by hand, but it's not physically real. And I was wanting to experiment with how we can get more emotion in games, how we can get messages across, and how we can draw people into games. So I thought, well, why not actually make things for real? And you get all your lighting effects for free and all sorts. And you can see I started off originally with the kind of faux 3D effect. And then I started taking this further and making it into models. I did little tests like this, just with bits of cardboard. And things like that proved that, okay, I could make models and then I could make them interactive as well. These are some of the designs that I was working on at the time, and I'm interested in architecture anyway, and they started to have quite a big influence on the design. So they started off quite gamey, I suppose, the designs for this world that I wanted to create. And you can see the influence that modernist architecture started to have, where the shapes got more and more simple, I suppose, more and more explicit of what they were. They're solar panels on the roof, and it just I was paring it down to basically the most important stuff, and this is how it turned out in our game Loom. That was all made by hand, so it's about a metre wide, this little house, and it was all filmed by hand like this. So I'll now show you the trailer. Some of the themes we were developing were along the lines of what Katrina talked about, sustainable development and self-sufficiency as well. So that was released about a year and a half ago. You can see this is the size of it. We actually had much grander ambitions, and for the last year and a half, Katrina and I have been working on creating an entire city. So this is what it looks like now. It's a little bit bigger. And yeah, so that's about, I don't know, what is that, 10 foot tall all in all? And so it's many times the size. And it all came from this. This was a drawing that I made right at the beginning. This was what I wanted to do, and I just couldn't do it. I didn't know if this idea was going to work, so that's why I ended up just one house. And so that's the intro to this whole project. And Katrina had a show on, and that's a bit of work that I saw of hers. And when you put them together, you kind of see how similar our way of thinking was. And I was like, I've got to work with this person. I'm going to give her a call. And yeah, that's how it started, basically. You go, like, I thought you wouldn't be in the least bit interested, but we've actually made this thing. And it's been an amazing project to work on. It's been incredibly rich, because this was one of the first drawings that we did after we started working together, and you can see there was loads to solve. There are still sort of areas that we hadn't explored and everything, and we're still finding things that need, questions that need to be answered. So creatively, it's been really interesting. This was exploring how to take what, a side-on drawing. How do we bring this forward? How do we start giving that space? And we gradually built it up, and it became more and more complex. Until, that doesn't look very good, does it? But we should have just left it at that. It's fine. We thought it looked good at the time, but that's basically the mock-up. So we built everything with a cardboard sketch, and Katrina will take us through how we went about each scene and how we built it up from a sketch to the full model. But now I'll show you the trailer that we just released for this sequel.
To say that the game hasn't actually come out yet. So really what we're talking about today really is about the process of making it. It will be out probably end of spring, maybe early summer, maybe summertime. It's quite strange really to be talking about it at this stage really, because it hasn't actually, we haven't actually finished it. So this is the team in the office. It's quite messy at this stage. It's a lot cleaner now. So actually, there weren't that many of us working on it, on the game, and there were quite a few people who sort of came in and out of the project later on, but essentially there was only really about 4 or 5 of us working on it at the time. So we started off, because at the beginning when Luke did Loom 1, he started off by using quite a big model for the space, but we sort of worked out that if we were going to do a whole city, we wouldn't actually be able to, model it at 1 to 20, which is probably what Loom 1 was. So we started taking some of my old models and actually sort of testing them to see whether they would work. And we sort of worked out that, when you see these models really close up, and you start to notice like the glue and but there were certain things that we wanted to sort of keep, like the sort of handmadeness of it. So we decided to use laser cut a lot of elements of it so that it would become a sort of precise, rough model. This was when we started sort of laying things out and positioning things. I mean, essentially the whole game was made up of lots of different buildings. I think there were 18. Were there 18 in the end? And each building would have its own narrative and its own story and its own character. And I think at some point, you know, we really got into it, and we really tried to almost become these characters in order to work out, you know, how you would live in these buildings and how they would work. These are some of the early prototypes that we did. I think for every sort of space, we would then have quite a few games, but we did quite a number of various sort of prototypes and these sort of sketch models in order to really work out how we could put these games, or how we could have Lumi walk around them. So we started off each space with just by doing sort of quick sketches. This was one of the sort of early buildings. I think this was the first one we did actually, which was the character for this is a sort of photographer, and the idea is that Lumi would come in here. She's lost her granddad, and she's trying to find him, and the whole game is basically at various points, at stages, she'll get some clues as to what's happened to her granddad. So this is sort of an early sketch model of the photographer's house, and again it's sort of using sort of elements of the camera. And these sort of lenses are then going to be used within the games themselves. So you know, some of the models are made up of card that we've cut, and other bits are sort of laser cut. And you know, and there's also elements of it that we found. For example, I think the light here in the corner was originally a pill packet or something like that. We've then sprayed, and this was a sort of final model that we then used in the piece itself. This was one of the first buildings that you see. I think you can also see it in the trailer. And again, we sort of started off by sketching out these ideas. We would start off with a character that we would then design around it. And this, the gatehouse, the idea was that the gatekeeper grew lemon trees all around the building and used the lemons to power the building itself. Luke also set up a sort of wireframe for the whole game, which was done in Adobe Flash. And this was really a sort of testing ground to test the games and to test the puzzles that you might have in the building. This was a very, very crude first sketch model of the lemon house, gatehouse. And this again was another prototype, and really sort of working out, you know, how much of it is sort of actually, how much of the building you can actually interact with within the game. And obviously we had to be very aware of the fact that it was going to be filmed afterwards. So everything that moved or had to actually move, or the lighting, for example, had to actually be made real. So we would use sort of light bulbs, because it's not a stop motion animation. It's actually sort of filmed. So everything had to be ready for the filming days, because we couldn't then, you know, make up for it later. So this was the gatehouse, and Luke in the background on the filming day. And just to sort of give you an idea of the scale of all of these sort of spaces, I suppose. And this was it all lit up. Luke wired up all the letters, and we used sort of mini light bulbs.
Why did I do that?
And I mean, even the TV inside, that's also been wired up, and so it's probably a really long process. This was another of the buildings. That was the market space that again you see in the trailer, and again we sort of we worked out the different spaces of the different buildings, and then sort of started laying them out.
What's your finger doing in that one?
I don't know. Probably pointing
You
at
never
where.
put anything there.
Yeah, probably. And this was the final thing. This was the idea of having a sort of rotating house, and the idea behind that was really that we would the character in this building wouldn't have enough space to have a sort of a kitchen, a living room, and so she would have to live on the ceiling as well. So whenever she needed to go into another space, into the bedroom, then the house would sort of rotate. And this was a sort of early prototype. I think this one was probably the most complicated.
I think that picture that we had earlier of me scratching my head was me trying to work this out.
Yeah.
This took the longest, and it didn't end up looking anything like this model in the end. Do you want to go to the next one? See, yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk a bit about the sort of working out the game process.
Yeah, I could do for hours, but I haven't got the time. They're all different. I mean, this you can see with this one, for example, that we took it onto paper first and actually started rotating the paper, and then we went to this cardboard sketch here, just if it would work, and it went through quite a few different versions. So that's a mock-up of a bit of it. That's just the next mock-up, because we had to get really close to the final thing, just to prove it would work. Because there were so many bits that would get in the way of the camera, we couldn't go back and remove a bit from the film footage, so everything had to be perfect straight away. And that shows you a detail of the final thing, where you do have all this interesting space that some bits are blocking some bits, and that becomes part of the puzzle. So it was, it was something that we've never done before, and I don't think has been done before like this. So that's why it was hard. Do you want to talk about these now?
Yeah. I mean, I think these. This was another sort of windmill.
I like this one, by the way, because you can see Katrina's direct influence. If you remember back from the first image that we saw, I think this was one of the first images that you illustrated, and we just started with an idea of a lighthouse that's powered by wind on the top, so it's a windmill at the same time, and you can see the direct correlation between your image, what our first model was, and then the final model eventually, which we might have in here, I'm not sure. And that was the wheel at the back, which, was probably the biggest thing. That was the biggest unknown as well. We didn't know if this thing would fall apart. We didn't know what was going to happen with it. But we actually work above a props department, which turned out to be an amazing blessing. Because we went down there, we were expecting just to make the wheel for us, but behind that, he'd mounted a turntable motor, which they use in Harrods and things like that for their window displays. He'd mount it on a vise sideways, and he plugged it in, and the whole thing just started to turn for us like that. So we got all that extra stuff and all these other talented people involved. And this is going back over some more cardboard sketches. This is me working with my dad. That's my dad. There's some metal work in this as well. He's a silversmith and a jeweller. And we wanted this little thing made. This is a miniature Airstream caravan. And it struck me the other day, like, one of the themes of the game is about self-sufficiency, or making things yourself. And in fact, the other character, apart from your main character, is your granddad, who's a handyman. And it seems to be sort of life-reflecting art now that I actually, I'm kind of working with my dad now on making this kind of thing. it's really helped. There's been a lot of I suppose, I don't know, what's a better word than love that's gone on this? There's been a lot of care and attention that's gone into this, and we kind of wanted that to flow through. If we wanted to do something and we felt really excited about it, we'd do it, no matter if it seemed a crazy idea.
And it seems also that, I think like the people that you tend to work with, Luke, actually don't really have a history in games. Most of the people who've worked on this game have never sort of. I never even used to play games really, and maybe that's also why it is so different, or why it's come out.
We get quite a few applications from people every week, just wanting, people say, I love games, I want to work for you, and they might have done a computer games course, whatever, but they're never as interesting as the other things that I might see from architects, from artists, from people who play computer games come thinking they want to make Call of Duty or what they've seen before, but I think it's incredibly limiting, and so I'm far more interested in bringing other skills and other ideas into it, and expressing ideas through the architecture. And I think that's something that Katrina will talk about in a minute, but it's something that I wanted to do and wanted to really push with this, that there are ideas that aren't forced upon you in this. Like the eco-friendly thing is not, there is nowhere in here that it says it is good to save water and it's good to use wind power and things like that. You just have to do these things. You have to fix certain things. You have to make this Ferris wheel go round, for example. You have to turn the lights back on. It's all inherent in the architecture, and so you're exploring an idea through play. And there is I'll just flick through a few more images that we've got here. You can see how Katrina's designs and the colours ended up in the final image. That shows you it all. That's how we filmed it. We saved all our money, and these things, that thing there cost £2,500 a day. So we had one day, and we had to get all of this in one day. We blew all our budget on that, but we got it in the end. And there are only a few mistakes that we'll have to sort out in post-production. But it was quite a precious situation to get that right. And we had to be sure that we knew all the ideas and everything on that day. But like I said, we had to. It's a game about ideas as well, and Katrina was one of the ones that helped express that through the architecture.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my sort of interests. My background is in architecture, and I will probably, hopefully, go on to become an architect. But the reason why I was really interested in working within games is really as a sort of testing ground for some of the ideas, but also to sort of in this city the buildings aren't just sort of used for shelter, but actually they provide so much more for the inhabitant. So they provide power, they provide food, but also mainly it's about play and a building that you can sort of fully interact with. And I suppose I hope to then bring that within the buildings that I hopefully one day will end up designing and building. That's it really.
Yeah. There we go. Thank you very much. Yeah, was there a question? Yeah, there was a question. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's really challenging. Yeah, it's not that complicated. The question was, how did we take the footage and turn it into a game? And without getting too technical, it isn't actually that technical in the first place. It's not. It uses Flash, which is quite a simple hands-on program to make things, which you can embed video on. So it's a question of embedding video And then we can add interactive elements, even physical elements.
And then you take your moving elements and then...
Yeah. And we can add physical things into that environment. We can have physical objects, we can throw a ball around in it, we can make the platforms have physical properties if we want.
Essentially, then, sorry to anticipate that I'm trying to work out in my head, taking your videos and bitmaps and your graphics context.
It's as visual a design process as we can make it, because that produces the best thing. If we had to worry too much about the technical side of it, we would never have been able to make it. But yeah,
I was just asking,
no.
I was wondering, because it's interesting to me, because I program this, and I'm wondering how I can do that.
There you go. Just all we need is a camera. Camera and be able to draw. All right. Have we got time? No, we haven't got time for any other questions. Oh. I hand you over to Matt.
Thank you very much.
From?
Hi, I'm Matt. I think I just said that was awesome because I was blown away by that, and I think actually some of the stuff that I'm going to show is quite similar in the sense of using sketches to develop, to really quickly iterate and develop ideas. But my sketches are about materials and material science. So I am one of 4 founders of a company called Bare Conductive. We make this, which is an electrically conductive paint. It's a relatively straightforward concept. We sell it in a pen in a jar, and we do all sorts of stuff with it. So we're a company which sells a product, but what I really want to talk to you about is how we developed it. So to reiterate the idea of the product, it is a paint, right? You can apply it with a brush, you can spray it, you can stencil it, right? Any way that you would normally apply a coating or a paint. But when it's dry, it conducts electricity. So here I've got my business card, because there's some paint on the back of the card, and you can see that it's lighting up an LED in my hand. So just to drive this home even more thoroughly, it's electrically conductive, it's non-toxic, dries at room temperature, you can use it in a bunch of different printing processes, it's pretty cheap, it can power small devices, and it can be used as a capacitor sensor. All of that is quite boring, but hopefully builds a little bit of context for this stuff coming up. So the project came from my time studying at the Royal College of Art and Imperial College. It was a program called IDE, or Industrial Design Engineering. And the program focused on combining artists and designers, architects, engineers, scientists, putting them all in one space, and really focusing on physical work. So that's just an image of the space. Obviously everyone here is comfortable with and understands the studio environment. But what we were really interested in initially in the project is the relationship of technology and the body. So we did this kind of survey of what was, at the time, pretty contemporary. So this started in 2008. We were interested in trying to find a space between something that was under the skin, like Stellark's ear here, or something that was on top of the skin. So at that time, e-textiles was super popular, and it's still, there's still a lot of interest in it. But we said, what if we could create a space that wasn't so invasive as being an implant and so temporary as being a jacket? So we looked closely at objects in the body, and we eventually came to this idea of applying electricity around and intimately to the skin. So this, if you in the vein of the last talk, was like the first sketch. So if we look at the image in the top right, this is just copper tape, right? So what if you have this wire essentially attached to your skin? What would you do with it? Is it interesting? How do you, if you look at the bottom left, like how do you interface between the skin and some other object? All really interesting questions, but this was quite bulky and terrible. But it got us to the idea of applying a material to the skin which would conduct electricity, right? So imagine a second skin that's electrically conductive. Okay, so this is the big question. That is my hand, and that's a silver paint. Most electrically conductive paints or inks are silver-based, or rather they use silver as a conductor. They contain a lot of solvents, they're toxic, you really shouldn't put them on your skin. But we thought, okay, it's an interesting idea. What would we do with it? You could make switches, you could have different you could control different devices, what does it mean when the body becomes an interface directly for electrical device? Instead of touching the iPad, you're wearing some of the intelligence of that device. But to really explore that, and this is where the really interesting sketch stuff starts, I think, we had to have a material which made it possible, because part of the requirement of our department was that you have to have a functioning and a kind of legitimate prototype to the idea. So in order to be practical, in order to graduate, we had to prove that you could actually produce a material which was safe for use on the skin, both electrically and chemically. So it started with this basic question of what's electrically conductive. We, in the end, focused on carbon. Carbon is the 8th most conductive element, right? It means that when you have the right arrangement of carbon, it can conduct electricity. And we started mixing it with lots of crap. We thought, so none of us are scientists. I'm not a scientist. My background actually is in econometrics. The other backgrounds were artists and engineers. So we said, how do we figure out how to make something to put on the skin? Presuming that Boots probably sells a lot of things that are already appropriate for the skin, we bought a lot of cosmetics. We made a big matrix of ingredients, and we said, okay, this one is really sticky, and it never dries out, and this one dries super fast, and this one, when it dries, it's really hard and brittle, and what does that mean? How do their ingredients contribute to these properties? And then we started mixing stuff together to see, one, how does it physically perform in terms of flexibility or drying time, and then how does it work electrically? But you can see that here we've mud mask and glamorized something or other, and just literally combining cosmetics and then eventually sourcing their ingredients and combining those directly. Stuff like eggs, which actually, there's still some of the egg science in the ingredients today. But we came to this, which was a functional but really awful material to use. But you can see it's lighting up an LED on the back of my hand. This is probably the most basic expression of electricity to most people, that when something lights up, it must mean it's electric. So that was the kind of first working prototype, which, here we have an image of. It's the same image I showed earlier. But what we had was just a material, so what do you do with this kind of material? At that time, what we were really interested in was doing this, which was saying, let's put circuitry all over the body. We produced some really compelling images of it, but it wasn't, it actually, strangely enough, was quite a short-sighted way to look at it. So what I want to run you through now quickly is that was the project, and now we've moved to a product which I think offers us much, much more interesting potential than any of those ideas did. But it's important to recognize that whole process was the foundation for what we've got now. So first question is, if you have a cool thing and a bunch of people want to buy it, how do you make it? Well, essentially we have a mixing problem. We have to mix something. This is our first mixing machine. It's my drill with what actually is quite a sophisticated high-speed dispersion blade. This was a very dangerous machine, and this was in my flat. This was literally trying to understand how do you mix the paint, right? So that was the first one. This was the second mixing machine. This is a Silverson. It's what's known as a high-speed dispersion mixer. It's not all that interesting until you see it work. It's really incredible how fast it can dissolve something into a liquid. I can see some people are smiling, so they appreciate this is really cool. But it was slightly more sophisticated, but it didn't really replicate what we were trying to do at scale. We started to improve our lab procedures. We essentially, in a year, went through the process of reinventing materials science, or reinventing some of the fundamentals of materials science and manufacturing scale-up for dispersed products, which, looking back on it, we probably shouldn't have done. We could probably hire somebody to do that for us. But the point is that these were all these steps, just like in the previous talk, all these steps trying to understand the bigger space, all these were steps to try to get to the product. We then got a space, which meant that my flat was much cleaner than it had been in a while. We then got a manufacturing space, so we've actually moved past this. But what's interesting is now this space, the most effective model we found for the machinery that we use now to produce the material, we're currently making about 40 liters a day. The best analog we found has been a blender and a KitchenAid mixer. So we tried to reinvent the wheel, and in the end, now we just have a couple KitchenAids and it works really well. So anyway, that's the kind of production story. It gets us to here. It comes in a pen and a jar. I've got some pens with me. But what it does is way more interesting. We have a couple simple kits that go with it. We primarily sell, well, I should say not primarily, but we sell a lot to educators and to geeks and makers and people who want to play with stuff. They do things like this. They make cards, and we've run a bunch of workshops. These are all actually workshops from the RCA. They're like a kind of liquid piano, this strange switch, liquid switch thing. Somebody sandwiched it between some silicon to make a pressure sensor, or a strain gauge rather. And then we've got like a hat that was like a pigeon poop detector. That was actually from India. That was from the National Institute of Design. I don't know why they built that, but anyway, the point is that the materials provided a great platform for other people to do their projects, which is what we've encouraged. Lots of workshops with kids. This is a good example of this girl is named Gigi, and she had never worked with an Arduino, got really into using our material, then wanted to combine it with an Arduino, and for some reason ended up, with the help of her dad, made this strange color mixer and this really odd drawing with our paint behind it. But it's a good vehicle for her to kind of explore some of this. But the really interesting stuff has started to happen where we've started to see people imagine this not as a way for Gigi to make like a color mixer, but to look at this as a material which allows you to create interactivity on almost any surface, right? So basically anything that you can paint, you can now interface with the computer through that surface. So it opens up some really cool opportunities. Here is one of a series of posters that we are developing that most basically you touch the poster and you hear a sound. I'll just skip through this stuff and get to this, which is basically that it's a field that we are calling, and some other people are starting to call, paper electronics. So this is different from printed electronics. Printed electronics are like cheap keyboards and mobile phones and stuff like that, right? Paper electronics proposes that actually you don't need a really high intelligence device. You maybe need lower intelligence, but in a larger space, right? So either a whole space is active, or you have lots of essentially dumb devices in a space that create a high level of intelligence for the whole space. So it's about interface. It's about unique interactions like interactions on paper, and it's also about it being ubiquitous. So as I said, we've got a series of posters, and hopefully we'll have an exhibition in early May, working with a bunch of illustrators on exploring how this format of a poster can become an interface for more information, right? So maps that contain more information when you interact with them, games on posters, gig posters that play songs to you, right, or tell you something about the band, posters that engage with spoken word content, and then the more extreme versions are posters that start to control other devices, right? So you're touching a piece of paper and something's happening on your computer, right? There's lots of kind of interactive books that have looked at that idea as well. This is a project which actually has just been nominated for Design of the Year at the Design Museum, and you should go because we're giving away 5,000 postcards or something. I think it's like 5,000 or 7,000 postcards. The concept was developed by a company in Liverpool called Uniform. They printed the postcards with our material. When you plug them into this box, the postcard becomes a musical interface. So imagine you take the red postcard and you plug it into the box. You can then touch the postcard to play the songs or move the track back and forth or change the volume. the media covered this as the postcard is storing the music. It is not storing the music. The box has the music. The postcard is triggering different songs from the box, but the point is that it actually doesn't matter at all how it works. The fact that people perceive that the postcard is storing music is awesome, and that's exactly what we want, right? We want people to think the paper has this extra intelligence. It's almost like disappearing ink, right? You get the postcard and you're like, oh, this is nice. You know, and maybe you don't take it seriously until someone's like, put it in the machine. You know, and you put it in and you play with it and you're like, the postcard reveals a whole another level of access to information. So anyway, it's a plug right now. I'm about to plug it. You should go to the Design Museum, and you should. We gave them a shitload of paint, so they printed a lot of postcards. So go and get one because they're really beautiful. So this is other stuff that people have explored with, is trying to make components out of the paint on paper. We've had people make capacitors, which is incredibly cool. Again, it's a bit geeky, but to see a piece of paper storing electricity is pretty incredible. They're not very efficient capacitors, but the idea of doing more than just making an interface, but actually making the paper have an electrical infrastructure is very exciting. The thing on the right is a game that someone developed for Mozilla Hack Day last year. It was developed by Imagination, and it was a really cool, this game was essentially a physical analog to a website. And so playing with this piece of paper connected you to the website, and it was all reflected on the web. It was very exciting. We've had lots of people do amazing textile work. This is a textile keyboard. And then probably, I think one of the coolest things is these lights on the right, done by a designer named Patrick Stevenson Keating, who realized that because our paint is water-based, when you put it in oil, it doesn't mix. Baby oil is essentially transparent, I think because it has the same refractive index as glass. So when you put our paint in a glass container, in baby oil, it stays as a little black blob, right? Just like imagine a lava lamp, except that all of the blobs are conductive. So what happens is as you manipulate the lamp, the black kind of dot in the bottom comes into contact with the wires from the light bulb, and the light turns on, right? So the electricity is flowing through the liquid blob of paint, into the light bulb. But what's cool about it is how it's such an analog interaction, especially with these gorgeous bulbs, that just by manipulating this lamp, the light gets brighter and dimmer. It's not something we could have ever imagined someone doing with the material, but we are really glad he's done it. So right now we're doing a couple of really cool music products, the postcards being one of them. Product packaging is really cool as well, because actually this allows us to make so many materials interactive that, not surprisingly, there's been a lot of interest from various people in packaging. And then the next big thing is really industrial printing research. And if you can imagine that process where I took us through saying, okay, we made a material in the kitchen and we didn't know how to make a lot of it and we had to reinvent everything to do it, we essentially now have to do the same thing with printing. Is that, okay, cool, the postcards are great, but screen printing postcards is a lot different than trying to print cereal boxes. So how do we really roll this out at a scale where we can see it make a difference? So then the other thing that I'll quickly talk about is just, it's fundamental to some of those applications. And I have a demo of this tonight, so afterwards we can set it up. But it's the use of the material as a capacitive sensor. Some of the things before used it as well, but I think it's useful to reiterate it because it represents some really cool potential. So your trackpad or your iPhone all use capacitive sensing to detect whether your finger is touching it, right? That's why it doesn't work with gloves, because it's looking for you. It's looking for something conductive to make contact with it. So when you put gloves on, your iPhone doesn't work, right? This is why, because it's looking for something conductive. So anyway, we can make a capacitive sensor out of our paint, right? This means that imagine a trackpad that's like the size of the table, right? It's a relatively low precision device, but you can interact with it in a different way because of its scalability and because it can be applied to different materials. It can be quite wide area, right? Like the size of a room. It can be discrete, like you might not know you're interacting with it. It can be multidimensional, so we can start to build up different surfaces. So imagine a three-dimensional trackpad. This is the basic idea. The demo I brought with tonight is effectively this thing, which is a pad of our paint connected here just to an Arduino, and we have the computer is making an inference about basically how far away your hand is, right? So it's pretty simple in that idea, but obviously it's pretty profound in that you can interact with the surface without touching it, and that surface can be made of wood or plastic or fabric, and it means that the way that interfaces look can change pretty dramatically. So another shameless plug is that, well, I should say actually before I get to that, that's all enabled by hardware. For those of you who are interested, I'd love to talk to you about the hardware development that we've done, because this is the kind of extension, is that we've invented all these crazy ways of interacting with computers and then realized that yet again, we have to now go through the process of figuring out how to make it real at scale. And the first step of this is creating hardware that's bespoke to us. So I thought, anyway, I was going to say another shameless plug. I thought that this slide was before. The reason I wanted to show this is that we were featured in Wired last month, which was awesome. It was incredibly cool to do that. But what was really exciting about it was that both the text of the article and the editor really understood the potential of the material as making spaces interactive. So a lot of the stuff that I showed was like about a postcard or a poster or like a badge that you put on your shirt. It's pretty small, but thanks to our hardware development and just general interest from our community, we think that the coolest stuff is this, which is the idea of turning the whole wall into an interface, right? It can be a pretty low resolution interaction, but already at our studio, we have light switches that turn the lights on and off. Like you see in the far left, Becky's touching this light switch. We're already doing that, and that, to me, is the best place for me to end, because that's the real potential of it, where all of this intelligence that we've got here starts to kind of bleed out into the environment. So that's it. Thanks a lot. I'll take a question while they're setting up if there's any questions. I mean, it really, it's like, so the question was, what kind of range do you get for that sensor that I showed with the hand but near the pad? Sorry. No,
Okay, yeah.
it's a basic trade-off between precision and distance. So the farther away it is, the less precise it tends to be. But I mean, basically, up to about a meter, you can still get a pretty precise signal. So like if we painted around a door frame, we can definitely tell if someone's walked through the door and about how tall they are, which is pretty cool. And then if you paint two stripes on a door frame, you can tell which direction they walked through as well. So, you know, there's obviously some pretty creepy applications to it as well. But there's some pretty amazing potential to make the space interactive. Yeah. You did? Oh, that's awesome. That's great. You're good. I'll have to get your email because we just updated them. They're way cooler now. So I'll send you a bunch.
Shall I start? Yeah. Hi. Hello. My name's Tom Betts. I'm currently Brighton based, and I guess I make games at the minute. That's my job. But I'm kind of come from a sort of general computers and creativity background. I've done a bunch of different stuff, so I'm not really like a classically trained programmer or anything like that. I didn't learn that at college or university or anything like that. It's all sort of self-taught. What I'm going to talk about today is I'll probably look at maybe the game I'm looking at the minute, but I'm also going to talk about just sort of my general approach to making games and why maybe it's different from a lot of mainstream kind of approaches. And again, it comes from my background. I'm really interested in generative and procedural technologies and approaches to creating content, and I always have been for the last kind of 10 plus years that I've been working in this kind of area of digital creativity. I'm going to skip a bunch of this because we don't really need a lot of the slides in here and we'll be short on time. So I love games, I've always loved games, but one of the things I like about them most is their potential as ways of exploring kind of possibility spaces or permutation spaces, and I get a bit frustrated with what it's sometimes the trend in modern games for you just to be basically having a linear entertainment experience where you press a couple of buttons to go to the next part. Now, for me, that's not what I came to games for. I came to games as a means to explore rule sets and to explore kind of the creative possibilities of systems rather than to just experience a more linear kind of story. So it's quite difficult to sort of talk about that without people coming down on one side, the kind of narrative versus ludology or script versus code. I want to be clear, I'm not against linear approaches to any form of creativity. They're fine, that's great. It's just not what I do, and probably because I wouldn't be that good at it, but I do really appreciate it when other people do it and they can do it incredibly well. So on the one hand, you've got games and sort of entertainment that are based around a kind of controlled authorship, and that's great because you get the crafted experience, you get the author's voice, you get kind of escapism, and you're not really responsible as a player or observer. You don't have that much pressure placed on you. If things aren't so good, it's generally because the person who made it wasn't that great at making it, rather than that you've done it wrong. And that's fine, that's a good experience, and just like everybody else, I like to listen to a song that has been written and sung by one person because it's their story and I want to experience that. But sometimes in games I don't want to experience that, I want to experience my story. So as opposed to the kind of linear approach, I'm really interested in procedural and generative possibilities, which represent kind of non-linear, unique experiences that aren't predictable. They're kind of, in a sense, they're more replayable because they don't end in the same way. They don't always have the same plot arc. They don't have the same character development or spatial exploration in exactly the same terms. There's always a possibility of something different. To me, they're closer to what I enjoy about games, and they're also, to me, closer to programming, which is something else I really enjoy. I think that the act of programming itself is kind of very playful and it's very exploratory and it's full of permutation, and so I like to kind of have that in the things that I make. You see a lot of procedural and generative technology in things like architecture, and you see a lot of it in creative digital practice as a whole. But one reason that I tend to be more interested in the area of games is that I feel that in there it has more interactive possibilities and that you can directly explore it as a user as well as a designer. A lot of the times when I see it used in sort of creative digital products, it's often for just a purely aesthetic end, which again is beautiful, but I'm kind of interested in using it from a gameplay point of view. I'm going to skip some of these. There's a lot of things about it that are beneficial for anybody who's interested in programming. Also, bear in mind, I wish I had a team. So there's only me, basically, that works on most of my projects. So I have to try and be as optimised and efficient as possible, and using maths to cheat, essentially, helps me do a lot of stuff at a much greater scale than I'd ever be able to do otherwise. So compression's part of that. Detail is part of that. I can't build a city. I haven't got the time or the resources or the money, so I don't want to place every single brick in a wall, but I'm kind of lazy enough to write a computer program to do that for me, and that's how I kind of get around this. Permutation, again, if I can make something that can be different many different times, I really enjoy that, because it makes me feel like I'm perhaps having a unique experience that is something that I might not ever have again, and it's also something that other people might not have again. They might have their own ones. This does, of course, introduce the idea that you can have a crap unique experience, and that does happen, but that's the kind of trade-off for me. I don't mind that. When you're using procedural, when you're using mathematics to generate content, there's the possibility of getting unexpected results. And again, that doesn't always mean that they're good at unexpected results. They can be bad, but at least they're unique, and at least they're part of that particular event or exploration at that time. And that's something that holds true for you as a developer, as someone who's producing it as well, is that I'll often write something, and because I leave it very open and let it kind of express itself, it'll do things that I never expected. And sometimes I'll be able to seize upon that and kind of capitalise on it, and sometimes I'll have to kind of like cut it down because it's really breaking things. From a gameplay point of view, a lot of people enjoy the sort of ownership that you gain from having something that's only yours. Even if it's something that's a bunch of pixels on the screen, or the way that things are organised in a world that you're exploring, the fact that it's only yours is something that people begin to feel sort of a connection to. And the other thing I like about it is that there's no perfect play. There's an idea in game theory about perfect information, perfect play, which means that there's, when you start playing a game, such as, say, for instance, drafts isn't played professionally anymore because the limits of it are too restrictive. Essentially, you can work out whether you're going to win or lose within the first move or so, and they stopped playing it professionally because of that reason. You get professional drafts competitions where the two players would sit down, one person would move and the game would be over, because essentially everyone knew all the possibilities that would occur from that point. Now, if you're having a prescriptive linear game, then why would you necessarily play it a second time? Certainly not for the outcome, because you know what that's going to be. Maybe for the story, in which case that's cool, but it's not part of my stuff. Also, there's Minecraft. Minecraft's a good example of this. I like making visible the sort of aspects of code. I don't mind showing people that this is a constructed world. It doesn't bother me. I'm not trying to simulate a cinematic experience or a realistic experience. I'm hoping that people can kind of get involved in the code that's actually making the space around them as well. Yeah, authorship, same sort of thing as I sort of touched on earlier. Let's skip over. Yeah. One thing that's interesting about this is a lot of games are using this now. As content gets bigger and more detailed for mainstream games, studio sizes are getting vast. You're getting hundreds and hundreds of people working for years on games. And that's only going to get worse as the potential in hardware technology allows us to make things at a much higher resolution and higher detail. People expect more and more simulation. They expect to be able to shoot a brick wall and for all the individual bricks to fragment and fall in realistic fashion. Now, you don't really want to be employing somebody at a reasonable wage to place every single brick in that wall and give them all physics properties. It's getting to the point where simulation and procedural generation is taking over a lot of those tasks, and will only continue to do so. And also, if you're in a game where the player can find objects, do you want to be placing the 10,000 objects that a player might find in a game like Diablo or something like that? No, you want to generate those objects. And that means that players are essentially exploring a kind of a search space of objects that are generated on the fly, almost like random dice rolls. So even the players become sort of, this is where it enters perhaps maybe a morally grey area. It's almost like a kind of slot machine, one-armed bandit routine where they're constantly rolling to try and find, the perfect line or the perfect item that's generated once in a million times. Right, I'm going to show some stuff now because I'll go on to my really philosophical stuff, which you can needle me about later if you want, but I'll show some of the stuff I'm doing. What I'll show is an example of how I work through a process, because we've had quite a few of those, and I think it's quite useful to see that. This is a little demo of an old school technique for generating dungeons in a game. And all I've done is I've sort of ported that into a two-dimensional system. You can kind of mess about with the different parameters to get the different kind of interactions. You can change a lot of different settings in it to create a sort of a variety of environments, but not very exciting. So the next thing I did with that process is I then moved into wondering what it would be like if I added another dimension. So now I've added a kind of vertical dimension. It's still got a lot of the same kind of controls. It's got a lot of the same. Sorry, the mouse is dodgy. But you're getting a sort of a space that is a bit more kind of enticing to explore. This is all algorithmically generated, so it's got, the more you work parameters into these systems, the wider the range of expression these systems are. One of my criticisms of a lot of people using procedural systems is that they don't spend enough time making those systems wide and expressive enough. So you end up with a lot of things that look same, but different. I'm guilty of that as much as anybody else, but this is the kind of the next step of that system. So this is generating a kind of ruined castle world using exactly the same process, but extrapolated into a three-dimensional space. So every time you play this game, you'll get a different environment. And in fact, the way the game works is that once you've completed it the first time around, you get access to all the sliders, so you can start choosing different settings. I also wrote it so that there are certain parameters that increase. Sorry. There are certain parameters that increase as you complete the game, so you'll get slightly more challenging environments through them being more vertical and so on. Have a little wander around. So you can see it's quite a kind of relaxing environment. The bonfires that you see in the distance, if I was to wander around and find one, as you collect the bonfires, it allows you to jump higher. You become essentially more kind of floaty, which allows you to access other areas of the kind of castle that you couldn't get to previously. And all those are placed sort of procedurally as well. So the gameplay is the same gameplay, but the location of the objects and the kind of challenges are entirely emergent. You may get certain levels that are actually unfinishable. That only happens like once every kind of 100 generations or so. But it is possible, or it's also possible for the environment to create dead ends that you can fall into and never get out again. The music as well is a kind of procedurally generated series of different soundtrack levels that are all kind of cycling around dependent on your location and your progress in the game. There isn't a specific kind of message necessarily or story in here. It's more just a kind of way of exploring an environment, and every time you play you're exploring the same environment, but again it's different, so the challenges of it are slightly different. Okay, I'll show one more thing. So this is the kind of stuff that I've been working on, and most of the time it's been kind of sort of semi-artistic projects. I've had a game I've had on Steam recently as well, which is a kind of generative music puzzle game. But at the minute, the main project I'm working on is a game called Sir, You Are Being Hunted, which is a game I'm sort of developing with a couple of mates really, although I'm essentially kind of the main programmer on the project. And we put it up for a Kickstarter. If anyone knows what Kickstarter is, we managed to get our Kickstarter goal last year, at the end of last year. We kind of got the company together off the back of working on a game for Channel 4. And what we're doing with this game is we're using my kind of technology, the procedural generation of worlds, to create the kind of background for the game. And the game's an open world kind of survival game based in a strange sort of Doctor Who-y sort of ye olde Englishy countryside with robots that drink tea sort of theme. So I'll show you a little demo of this. I'll try and run it bigger, although it did go a bit funny when I tried to do that earlier on. Okay, let's not do that one then. Let's run it smaller. Okay, so I'm taking some of the similar kind of technology that I used in the previous game, but in this one, it uses the technology to basically generate a series of islands in our archipelago, and then within each of those islands, it defines areas as being different types of British countryside. So there are fenced fields, there are hedgerows, there are forests, there are villages. So everything you see here is mathematically placed. None of it has been placed by hand. Even the kind of flying birds and stuff are all sort of procedurally defined. There's also a bunch of robots wandering around in here that will undoubtedly kill me within the next few minutes. We've got a day and night cycle that happens. Even the clouds are kind of procedurally kind of generated. So all the objects you see around are all placed mathematically. And what this meant is it meant that we could produce something that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Because we would never have been able to have afforded to spend the time to kind of produce the amount of content that's actually being generated here. I'm moving a bit like an idiot because I'm not using the mouse. I'll eventually get to the sea. There's boats that you can then use to kind of move from one island to the next. There's roads that go between the villages. And there's one of the things I'm supposed to collect. I wonder if I'll be able to find a guy if I go to the village. We've even got situations where, like in the houses in the villages, you can open and look in the houses. There's like an system. All the loot, all the items are procedurally generated for the. In fact, the village name's procedurally generated. So this is Iron Swelling. You'll never leave. All the villages are generated. Their names are from like a sort of dictionary of various different names. So if I look in this door here.
It looks like there's something useful in there.
Yeah, this is Mr. Walters. So I can take a flask of tea out of that house. I've no idea what will be in the houses. Again, that's all sort of selected from tables that are all generated at the time. We haven't found any guys, which is kind of lucky, but I'm sure they're around somewhere. So I mean, it's interesting for me because it's been a really interesting process because a lot of the times it's about sort of trimming and pruning a system rather than explicitly defining the way anything will be. So I might have to reduce the number of hedgerows that there are or the height of them, but I can't dictate specifically where they're going to be without that sort of spoiling the kind of unique nature of every island that's generated. And with this game, the players are going to be allowed to generate their own islands and play with those and select various parameters when they're doing that, so they could give themselves a really hard time by just making islands that have no houses, so there's no food to get hold of. So or they could make ones that are full of forests, which means it's going to be quite easy. Oh, there's some guys in the background. Should we run over and see them? Oops. I wonder if they'll hear me. Yeah, if I'd have found a bottle, I could have thrown it at them. Oh, I can hear them. Okay, I'm going to get killed. Where are they? Ah! No! Stop it! Oh, there he is. Ah! No! Ah! Oh. So yeah, these guys will again, they're placed procedurally around the map, and they work out what interesting locations there are, villages and so on. They will patrol between them. They're also capable of attacking each other as well, which you can use to your advantage. There's a bunch of other kind of emergent systems in there that you can use. You can throw things to distract them. You can even disturb birds in the trees who will then fly away and distract the robots. If you're watching from a distance and birds fly away, you know it's because something's near there. So it's about building these kind of generative systems that can all interact in a way that is sort of unpredictable and gives a sort of a fresh sort of nature to every world that's generated. So yeah, like I say, like everyone said so far, grab me later if you want to ask me any more questions about that. Am I okay? Is that done? Okay. Thank you. Oops. Who's next?
Yeah. So, because we're running out of time a little bit, we're gonna have a little chat conversation while the guys from SLUP set up. They're gonna show a little video as well, so we can actually talk about their work, and then we're gonna leave them to just play for the rest of the evening, maybe 9:30 or so. But if anybody has questions for the speakers, okay, or you guys wanna put some video?
No, I thought just demo.
Cool.
Excuse me.
This is my job now. I can excuse the fact that it's a day, making sure
So does anybody have any questions for the speakers so far? No, because we're going to start with the iCoding.
I guess there's some I didn't regulatory this ID there is no place for you to call direct and you get it just numbers right now as it. Yeah. That's what I do.
Yeah, we're just going to spend like 1 minute describing what our systems are doing. This is mine. It's just a text editor. I'm just executing code in this window. This is playing a bass drum and a snare, and I can build us functions that manipulate that loops. Right, Dave will now describe his system. So speaking and programming at the same time is quite difficult.
You did.
But, you showed me. Oh, I do. I hold it. Yeah. So my system is the one that's on your right, and this is a visual programming language. So I program this by dragging blocks. So if I drag this one out, this is a play to play a sound, and then I can just build a little synth graph. So I can play some pink noise and give it a frequency to play at. And I can just play like that. And it plays very quietly. And I can change some of the parameters so I can make it play for half a second. It's not very good noise. And this is all over this graphical kind of structure that you can build. It's actually just making text code which gets printed out when I execute it. So you can see it's just a piece of code that gets run. And that's it for me.
Hi, mate, and I'm booting my computer. Do you want to talk about where we started?
You can do that if you want.
Okay, I'll talk about what was my computer reset its clock to January 1st, 2008. I don't know, we've been going a long time, I don't know how long, and we've basically just been messing around with software, and we've got an interest in music, and we thought we'd come from the programming, the boring programming that we did, and we'd use that to make some music, basically. So, when was it? 2000?
2000.
2000. We thought we'd do some experiments, writing software to make music in a generative sense. So it was just kind of hacking together little scripts or little pieces of code, and we each had our own favourite system. So I was kind of predominantly Mac-based. Alex was using Linux a lot. And at some point we decided we wanted to kind of synchronise it. So we thought, well, we'd just use a network, and it was fairly straightforward. So we came up with this whole protocol for how we can get these two machines to make music by sending messages to each other. We don't have anything to show you from our own days. We destroyed it all. What we've got at the moment is like, I don't know what version number?
3.
3? Version 3 apparently, 3.2 I think. And this is a little bit more advanced. It's using, anybody that's in the know, it's using OSC messages to pass synchronization messages between our three computers. So basically we just all need to be on the same network and we can be in sync with each other. And then it's basically down to us as individuals what we do with that and how we work with music. Alex has got some interesting text up on his screen that he's going to manipulate now whilst I fix my computer.
Or maybe we should just go straight to the discussion. Probably better. Yeah. We'll stop talking.
Before we start, really, I was very curious about some of the people that presented before. They seem to have like a really kind of strong influence on the idea of producing a practice that somehow lives within design in different areas of either architecture, game development, and in a way really kind of finding or like trying to kind of find a new field, right? Like it seems that the old canonical kind of way of structuring the disciplines are kind of a bit more fluid right now, and it seems that sometimes this code is allowing us to kind of migrate very kind of fluidly between different disciplines, and I'm very curious to see, like, I mean, it seems that everybody's kind of very business oriented in a way, and getting something out of it, and it seems also kind of a survival mode, and I'm very happy to see that the new generation is actually kind of engaging that scene that way. I want to hear a little bit about that aspects of the industry, and where do you get the money, how did you start with that?
I mean, I've done a bunch of different jobs, so I've only really been doing game design for about 4 years or something, but I've done a lot of associated work previously, and for a while I even managed to sort of make it for a couple of years as a paid artist. I know, it doesn't sound like it's possible, but this is when it's good. And then the reason that I ended up working in the games development area at the minute is because I used to do a lot of digital art, and through that I was interviewed by a couple of journalists, and because he was a journalist for the kind of games development area, I ended up talking at a conference for Channel 4 about games development, games design, and then little did I know that they were kind of using that to check out what was going on, and a year or less than a year later they got some funding to basically start developing a series of games, because from their perspective Channel 4 wanted to get in touch with their audience, and their kind of young audience, and they realised that basically the audience that they were interested in wasn't really picking up on the stuff they were making. They were putting a lot of money into programming that they weren't seeing because they were all on the internet playing games. So they wanted to see if they could basically make a game that connected with their audience. So I got the gig being the coder on that game. When that game finished, we had a little bit of profit which we kept rolling forward for about 3 or 4 months to build a prototype, which we then took on to Kickstarter to get the money, raise the money to, yeah?
What do you mean running forward? I'm actually using Unity there.
Yeah, I'm using Unity at the minute. I come from like, I mean, I come from like a C#, C++, C background, but I've written in all kinds of different stuff. The Unity reason was because Channel 4 requested it to be Unity because they needed cross-platform, and it just made more sense at the time. And now I'm kind of just ingrained in using it as an environment. So,
and that's you're being hunters.
yeah. Yeah, it's all. I mean, basically, I'm at the point with Unity now where I can do almost anything that I could do in any other system just because I'm familiar with it. Yeah. So then Kickstarter, and that's kind of where we are now. We will run out of money, obviously, and then I'll have to go do a proper job. But until that happens, hopefully we'll get the game finished in time and get some profit out of that. We made a little bit of money out of the game we've got on Steam as well, and also being in bundles. If anybody's making games bundles are where it's at money-wise.
The humble bundles.
Yeah, I wasn't in that one. Damn. Didn't make no one was in that one. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, you?
Yeah, I was going to touch on a few things that came up with that, like the sort of, you were talking about having a business mind, or more entrepreneurs. I think it's a good time for entrepreneurs, and particularly in the games industry. I think we're seeing it in loads of different disciplines. But I think with games have started off 30 years ago. I mean, I wasn't a programmer, I wasn't alive. Like when they were, the games started, and they were done by creative programmers, and they controlled the technology. And so they could do whatever they want. And there were loads of games that came out in the 80s, and people were there was an indie game scene basically where there were entrepreneurs and people putting out stuff with the Spectrum and that. And then big business took over, and for about 15 years it's all been about creating, graphics getting better, and they were controlled by the big companies. Now we're seeing tools like Unity and Flash and things like that we're able to take control of again. And the power seems to be coming back towards the artist or someone with an idea who wants to realise that idea. Simultaneously, publishing has changed as well. So games publishing doesn't have to be in a box. We can get games out through the Humble Bundle. Everything's digital, and so it's quite a fertile time and quite exciting.
Unity isn't expensive too.
It's free though.
I know it's free, obviously.
No, but, well, I mean, one interesting point is that there's a guy who wrote a game called Thomas Was Alone. It's on Steam, and I know him reasonably well, and he's done really quite well out of it. And he was going to buy the professional version of Unity, and they told him not to, because he was a really good poster boy for what you can do with free.
I wondered this because I've got a trial copy.
Yeah.
I've been writing anyway, it doesn't matter. But
Yeah.
you can get it free, and it seems they don't care that you have it as a trial.
No. I mean, there's some limits. Like if you start raking in £10 bazillion, you're supposed to get it. But by that point, you can buy it
They
anyway.
let you have it free easily, because if you actually move it,
Yeah, that is exactly. Yeah. So there is restrictions on it, but you can do a lot with it. You can get around most of those. It depends what you want, essentially, I suppose.
I was no, don't worry about it. Just speak up. I just think that I think this idea of like cross-platform work is founded on arrogance that is developed through access to information. Arrogance not being bad, but like meaning that the thought that we could invent a new material is quite an arrogant thing to do as a bunch of non-scientists, right? But it wasn't. It was like more ignorance than arrogance initially, right? That, well, sure, why not? Let's make some stuff together. And luckily, we had enough access to the information to move forward, but there's not enough, essentially not enough access to the information that would have told us this is actually not possible. And I think that that's the key is to nurture that, but then to also hold this attitude that anyone can use it, and play with it and do what they want with it. So that to me is really exciting.
Audacious ignorance.
Yeah, it's like audacious ignorance, but it's really naive.
But it kind of sounds like you're kind of coming from the point of view of, you don't want to say this isn't possible. Is that what you mean by your kind of arrogance?
Yeah, definitely.
Nobody's told you you can't do that, so you just do it.
Yeah.
Everybody else will go, no, you can't.
Definitely, but then I think then the question is why turn it into a business? And I think for us it was because literally a few people emailed us and said, I want to buy it. And we said, really? Why would you want to buy this? And that is a really, it was a fun challenge to see, like, what does it mean to make, we were intending to make a business out of it. It's not a entrepreneurial, strategically entrepreneurial thing.
But you managed to tell us, I mean, you're doing this kind of research under the auspices of academic work.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
But then Imperial College they're not claiming ownership. I mean, sometimes this happens with your research or theses.
Well, I mean, I think that we were doing it as part of a master's degree, right? Which is different because a lot of PhD research gets treated.
Sorry, I was assuming it was under the document.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I think that we actually applied to the RCA incubator with it, and they didn't take us, which is fair enough. I understand why they didn't at that point, but it was good to not get caught up in the college because then we got a real market test quickly, which sounds like terribly dry. I never thought I would think of it that way, but it's really exciting to try to make something that people want. Yeah.
I think, but if you're wondering who I am, okay, I teach at Unit 23 at Bartlett. I've been invited to throw my 2 cents in. It's a fascinating set of talks. I wanted to talk about the interface. I mean, I think it kind of follows on from a point you're making about having access or being able to make this stuff. Whereas before you would have had to have a certain amount of technical knowledge, or there was a kind of restriction imposed by perhaps by the interface that we interact with this technology. And I think that there's something changing in that. There's something much more fluid between the physical world and the digital world, which I think definitely your talk, Matt, explored today, and also you guys. I think it's kind of the other way around, that perhaps you're making physical models to get into gaming without having to do the coding, right? Which I think is super interesting. And I wondered if any of you wanted to talk about that relationship between the tangible, the physical, and the digital.
I mean, I guess, yeah, sure. I think that I guess I don't know where to start, but to me that doing something physical for me is deeply satisfying in the way that because it can be shared, and I look at the similarities to all of this is that these are all of these projects are showing us how to build something, right? And that makes it tangible. The tangible doesn't necessarily have to be physical.
Your work, for instance, shows the potential of a different kind of interface.
Yeah.
Kind of maybe more.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we think about a lot is how information is shaped by the interface which it's intended to be received through, right? So information is not really interface dependent, or it's interface independent. So when we're saying, look, you can have all these crazy interfaces, the question is, what is the information? How is the information going to change relative to that? And is there an ideal of presenting an interface which most honestly presents the piece of information? So I don't know. It's a kind of a loop that we get stuck in a lot because it feels like maybe we're just applying a different facade, which we probably are.
Do you like the idea of getting closer to digital stuff and interfacing with, something that we can all relate to? Is that one of the real motivations behind it, rather than a mouse?
Well, I mean, I think there's a ton of interactive book projects, right? Like books you open up and you touch it and it opens a web page, or it sings you a song, or it gives you additional information, kind of like a physical Wikipedia, right? And I think those are really cool because the book is an interface that is honed over a long, long period, right? It's designed by committee, right? It is a certain size because it works well with us. Obviously, there's kind of practical constraints with technology available. And I like the idea that we shouldn't reject that, right? I mean, it's like iBooks drives me nuts. That skeuomorphism makes me crazy, but at the same time, I see what it's trying to do. But unfortunately, reading a book in the iPad kind of rejects the book while kind of trivially embracing it. And what we're saying is, use this book, because we've worked really hard to achieve this thing as a species, but add something else.
Sorry. Okay, so it sounds like you've kind of invented a technology that can change interfaces. You're interface agnostic, has nothing to do with that. It's another platform to be manipulated.
Yeah.
Hence, you're kind of interested in, I can't remember the name of the design of the light bulbs and you've been managed by the phone before. But if it was, if you start out creating materials and you don't know kind of where it goes, essentially.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're not being more separate. Whoa.
Turn a battery. When it's quieter.
You can start putting some beats on the background.
Oh.
Yeah, I can start singing. I mean, I guess that for us, it's like, we're not trying to direct the development. We're just trying to encourage it. Yeah. And watch to see what happens. Because we don't, that we're not, now we realize not to be so arrogant as to be able to predict it.
Oh, okay. I didn't
Do we have any questions from the floor? Open up this question. Who's got a burning question for one of the guys? I'm going to stand here to see there are the other thing that came up really strongly in all the work shown today was this idea of play, which is something that came up again and again. And I wondered, maybe you could ask Katrina and Luke to talk a little bit more about play, or the process. How do you think play, you talked about your family being toy makers. Do you think that came through your architectural education, or is it something that came as perhaps a byproduct of that, or something that came as a way of maybe a reaction to it? How do you think the process of play comes into the design process? Because we tend to see it as quite serious occupations.
I think what I found quite interesting was when you were talking, Matt, about how the digital can sort of actually add to the environment. And I think generally, computers nowadays are used to make things easier and to make things more accessible. And for me, actually, in a way, it becomes more interesting when you can really, it adds to the environment and it becomes something that you can interact with and play. And it sort of forces you to not become a sort of passive person in the environment, but actually, someone who reacts to the environment. I was, in my master's, I was particularly interested in the architecture of Arakawa and Gins, where they actually sort of use colour and the physical environment really to sort of force you to become, to interact with your space. And I suppose for me, it probably does come from my background with toys.
Right, and it's about it. You want me to take over? I can't fight the music either. Even talk with it, I don't know what to do. It is the coolest Excel spreadsheet I've seen in my life.
It's a classic demonstration of interface.
Yeah. No, I like what's happening over here. The visuals are brilliant. You were talking about how actually making spaces games, which I find interesting, about how you can engage someone in a space, as if it's a game. I work for a company called Hide and Seek, who do things like the Southbound. They do live performances there, and it's newly emerging. They do alternate reality games and things like that, and they're all about turning spaces into places where you can play. So, for example, they did something recently called Tiny Games, and some of you might have seen them. They were dotted all around London. In each borough, there were these circles on the ground in specific places, and there were rules written on them. So one, for example, was people poo sticks, and it was on a bridge, and you could pick a person with a friend, and you'd watch them go under the bridge, and then whoever came up first on the other side was the winner. So they were just little nice ideas like that dotted around, which made you relate to your space in a different way, and made you, that for example, made you notice people. And they were more than just games. They kind of made you relate to space and people differently. And that's something that's going to, I think, get more and more popular as people recognise what that thing is. And that it's okay to engage with it. I think one of the problems actually that Hide and Seek has is that people don't want to do this kind of thing. They're not used to it. It's about getting that idea over. The more it happens, the more popular it will be, the more interesting ideas it brings. You're going to have to coat the house with all this stuff and make it interactive.
We'll have to resolve the problem to actually get into the house.
Yeah. We've come up with an idea for you, by the way, like locks that aren't locks. You just have to wave your hand in front of the door in a special way, and if you get it right, then it opens.
Any burning questions from the floor now? You sure? I had another question for Tom actually about something fascinated by it. So the game is infinitely different.
Well, within.
Because I'm interested, you talk a bit about the aesthetic of it, that you don't want it to look photorealistic. Or you want it to, you mentioned you wanted it to, you didn't mind that it looked like it was a game.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I'm wondering, like, how do you decide, because I suppose it goes back to this question of versions of reality, like a certain amount of abstraction of both your games, you decide to take how do you decide which bits of reality you want to abstract, or how do you decide on the aesthetic? What's driving the aesthetic in the game?
It's kind of hard to say because I've been doing this for quite a long time, and I think I've just become ingrained in the kind of history of the medium I work in. So there are aesthetics within game design that are just part of the inheritance of that system, and they come from sort of mathematical structures, they come from gameplay structures, they come from the limitations of hardware and how that's developed, they come from nostalgia about particular periods of hardware history and the visuals and aesthetics associated with that. But I try quite hard not to, because it's generative, I try and let it express itself in a way I can. But also, a lot of the projects I work on are by necessity have to be designed for an audience. So they're not my aesthetic 100%. If I was making a game for myself, it wouldn't look like that. But then you don't really make games for yourself, because you're making a game for someone else to play, otherwise it's not really games in a sense. So it's a difficult thing to answer. I don't have a specific goal necessarily in mind. It's a combination of a lot of different things, but I also kind of tend to sort of see through the aesthetic of it, because I end up seeing the kind of underlying structures of things. That's the sort of thing that fascinates me. I don't know, yeah, maybe I'm autistic or something. But yeah, I kind of enjoy the permutation of something. So it's interesting to kind of just imagine what it could be doing,
example, you have to regenerate your city. But what if I take the beer or I take the pub? Let's see that change happening. It's happening at the same time. This then you start to create your own style. And this is what I wish to see, all this to be live. Yeah, it's only there, but I don't see. I'm gonna experience it, of course. But I wanna get really strong, even more.
If
because we're in